right, we are going to go ahead and get started. So, welcome. This is the final session in our four-part training series. And today we're going to be talking about developing your reliable charging plan for your electric school buses. So, this is one of the topics that I think every single panel mentioned is one of the most important things and the issue that, school districts really need to pay attention to plan for because it could be a big frustration or it could go really well, but you want to make sure that you're planning, you got all the right partners, and make sure you work with your utility very early and often. So let's get started. Okay, so today we are going to be talking about how we charge an electric school bus. And just as a primer to make sure that everybody understands the basic terminology. If we're talking about level one charging, it's 120 volts. It is not suitable for an electric school bus. That is basically your regular wall outlet, and it would take forever to charge a vehicle, let alone a school bus with level one charging. So we're not even going to really be talking about level one charging today. Level two charging is basically like a dryer outlet, 240 volts, and it is good for residential or commercial charging. And you get about 5 to 13 hours of um, charge time. Well, I would say it's more 3 miles for every hour of charging is what I get when I charge up at a level two. Then you have DC fast. DC fast is not just one particular speed. This is direct current. It is great for commercial or for on-the-go charging, and there is a wide range of chargers, um, speeds everywhere from 25 to 150 kilowatts or more, depending on the vehicle and what the kind of the speed of the charge that it can accept. And you will get charged a lot quicker, and depending on the type of charger that you have. And our experts today are going to go into a lot more detail about which one of these, but we want to just kind of level set and make sure that you all had the right terminology. All right, there's a resource that we're going to be sharing with you in the chat right now, and it is Electric School Bus Charging 101. It is a great document, it's a great resource, and Tyler is going to pop that link into the chat for you. Whoops, I did not do that. That's kooky. Let me go back to it. Okay. So want to make sure that you get this resource, and there you go. And then we're gonna move on. So that resource is in the chat. Make sure you take a look at. Are y'all seeing this? I'm not touching anything and it keeps flicking out. That is really odd. Okay. Apologies, little technical difficulties. I was trying to change the slide, and instead it is sending me to the document. Sorry. We are going to get past this a different way. Hold on. I'm gonna stop my share. All right, we're gonna get past that document and go back to you guys. Apologies for the little technical difficulties. It wouldn't be. There we go. Here we are. Okay, back on track. Just wanted a very quick primer on the cost that you're looking at. So if you're looking at doing some level two charging, your equipment can cost anywhere from $2,000 to $5,000. Installation could range anywhere from $1,000 to $10,000, depending on the complexity. Your experts today are going to be giving you a lot more details as to what affects that cost of installation and why the equipment charges can range that much, why they can differ so much. So if you're looking at a medium powered DC fast charger, say 30 to 60 kilowatts, the equipment cost could be anywhere from $25,000 to $30,000, and installation could be $4,000 to $15,000, depending on complexity. And planning is key in getting ahead of the game and making sure you plan way ahead before even if before you break ground on a new construction project, it is great to put these things into consideration and pre-wire because that can really help bring your installation costs down. And a faster, higher power DC fast charger, the equipment can range 40 to 55,000 or more. And the installation cost, again, can be about $15,000 to $50,000 depending on complexity. And what are all the factors that can determine your installation cost? I'm not going to go into them in deep detail, but wanted to give you a high level view. So basically the distance from power supply, that is a big factor. Your design, is it freestanding or is it attached to a wall? Did you have to break up concrete to get to it? Is the concrete already there? So network charging, is it monitored to be able to manage? Do you have online software? Is it networked or is it what we call a dumb charger? And managed charging, that is any strategy that you use to control the rate of charging or when something charges, that can really help affect the cost of operations and installation. So today, our agenda is we're going to start with the utility panel. We're going to hear from 3 separate utilities in Louisiana, CLECO, Entergy, and DEMCO. Then we're going to have a 5-minute break. Then we're going to move into our charging panel where we're going to hear from Jack with BTC Power and Drew with InCharge. Then we're going to talk to Alex with EPRI about vehicle to grid projects. And then we're going to have more time for Q&A. And then we'll set you up for success with some more resources and some more information on how we're going to be intending to continue to support you going forward. So with that, I'm going to introduce you to your utility panel today. We have Richie Beinhard, who is also our board president at Louisiana Clean Fuels. He is with CLECO. He is the EV program manager. We have Amanda Hodge with Entergy. She is the project manager for transportation electrifications. And David Latona of DEMCO. He is the director of economic development and government engagement. So we're going to get started right here with a little primer from Richie on how the power gets from them to you, to the bus.
Hey everyone, thank you, Anne. A lot of people understand how power is delivered to their house or to their business in a really simple way. This has a lot of detail here, and I'm going to kind of talk about it at a high level. But starting from generation, that goes through transmission, it goes to substations here on the left. So the substation is the first leg of the distribution system for an electric grid. Then there are distribution feeders that connect that substation out to our customers. And then there's on the on-site infrastructure side, we have distribution transformers that step the voltage down to a usable level for our customers, and then a meter. And typically the utility will own everything up to the meter. And then the customer is responsible for everything downstream of the meter in a typical project. So the customer is responsible for the load center, conduit, service conductors, that's type of stuff a traditional electrician can handle, and the utility is responsible for everything else. So typically for an ESB type project for putting in chargers, the utility will maybe place a couple of poles, some second or primary feeder to a transformer on a pad mount and a meter, and then the customer is responsible for everything else. So if you're looking at a substation upgrade or anything beyond maybe a reconductoring on a feeder, the project's probably not economically possible. But the good news in this region, we often have enough capacity in many places, not all, to support these types of loads without major upgrades. And I believe you're muted.
You ready to load your presentation? You're ready. And you are on mute too now.
Okay, thanks, Anne. I'll get started. So Anne already introduced me. I'm the board president of Louisiana Clean Fuels, but I'm also and my main job is the electric vehicle program manager for CLECO Power. CLECO is a investor-owned, vertically integrated electric utility based in Pineville, Louisiana. We have about 3 gigawatts of generation. We own distribution and transmission, throughout Louisiana, concentrated in the central, southern, and eastern regions of the state. And we have approximately 300,000 customers. The 295,000 figure is maybe 6 months or a year old, so I bet we're even closer now. So what does Coleco do related to EV charging? We have some commercial incentives that any school district can qualify for if you're a Coleco customer. We have an incentive of $1,000 for that level 2 charger that Ann introduced, the slower speed, simpler, cheaper unit. We can give you $1,000 per plug. And then the more expensive DC fast charger, or really medium speed DC chargers work too. That's a $3,500 incentive. It's important to mention we do have a project annual cap of $25,000 per customer. That's specific to site location. So if you have multiple schools, you would be subject to that maximum limit at each school. So you can learn more about that on our commercial EV page. You can just type in, EVs Coleco and find your way there via Google or however you want to go. We also provide fairly detailed fleet assessments so we can help you understand the cost benefit of going to electric. Typically, these projects are really all about making a capital investment up front to have lower operating costs ongoing, right? So electricity is much cheaper than diesel, propane, or gasoline to use for transportation, but it's typically a little bit more expensive on the front end. So we can help you understand that equation, see when you'll get that payback on that additional investment, and how much you'll save, and help the school district or any sort of decision maker in your organization have a more comfortable and better understanding with like a project like this. So we do provide some special rider for public charging that a school bus or school district would not qualify for, but it's relevant, I think, if anybody else is on the line. And then we also have residential incentives like mini utilities, so $250 for putting a level 2 charger in your home or in anywhere in our service territory. So at a high level, if you're considering a ESB project or even considering applying for an ESB grant, it seems very early in the process to talk to your utility. I really want to emphasize that it's never too early. You can talk to me if you're a Coleco customer, if you're just barely even considering a project like this. It really, really can help the project be successful by getting involved early with your utility. It's not just lead time on equipment, which it is sometimes a problem. It's also projects can really be constrained at certain locations, be it on property or certain schools within a school district may have no capacity versus plenty of capacity. And driving the buses to the right location, I guess pun not intended, is really, really important to make these projects be cost effective. Like, any utility can provide you however much power you want, anywhere you want, per rules by the Public Service Commission. It's a matter of time and money, right? And it can be very, very cheap to put in, say, like a 200 kilowatt service to, have 10 medium speed chargers at a well positioned location on the right spot of your depot, at the right depot in your network. Or if you really, really, really want it in a difficult to serve location, the sky's the limit on the cost, right? So it really is important to engage your utility and help. We can help you, Coleco can help you, and many other utilities can help you, pick the right spot for this project. Having an experienced distribution engineer walk the site early in the process can avoid a lot of headaches. And then another one, and this is something that can trip up customers and utilities sometimes. Many utilities offer dedicated municipal, school, or governmental, or even church electric accounts. We have a church and school electric rate that provides a little bit of relief on the costs. So it's important that you factor that into your project. So, and then the next issue I'll do before I hand this back over, or I'll talk about is, designing your charging with your electric bill in mind. Not many customers, even some of our, more sophisticated customers, don't have a great handle on how electric bills are calculated. You just kind of receive your bill. In a hot month, it's expensive. On a cold month, maybe it's expensive, and you don't really understand why. Chargers have a very high demand charge component, especially for fast chargers. That is a fixed cost on your bill that you have to make up for with actual use of the charger, right? So imagine having a super high-speed charger that you only use for 2 hours. That is a extremely expensive way to deliver electricity from a commercial billing perspective. So you really want to utilize those chargers at least 6 or 8+ hours a day before you really see an effective cost of power, right? So designing your chargers to be slow as reasonably possible is really important for an effective, rate. Sometimes, fleet managers can reflexively go for fast charging just because it seems like it's simpler to manage. And it can be, it's a little bit closer to that diesel experience. But school buses are often idle for 8, 12 hours a day. Let's utilize that idle period to charge the battery. Let's not charge it incredibly quickly and then have it sit idle and have a expensive asset not under use in a very high bill. So with that, I'll turn it back to Ann to go to the next panelist.
Fantastic. Thank you. So next up we have Amanda. It's like a first time with a Zoom today. So Amanda, you are up next, and she is with Entergy, and she's going to give you a little background information about how to work with Entergy and some of their specifics.
Yes, let me get my presentation up for you guys. I am used to Teams, so forgive me. I may be a little clunky at this, but hopefully, there we go. Looks like it came up. Okay, well, yes, I'm Amanda Hodge, and I am with Entergy. Wanting to walk you through a little bit. I know you've probably heard from some other people from Entergy before, but the electrification team here has gone through some changes. So Cherie Schmidt, who's also on the board for LCF, she is now the Senior Manager of National Accounts and Electrification. And then we have Steve Valak, who is the new Cherie, and he is the product owner and manager for transportation electrification. And then you have me, who is also new. I think I've been here for about 6 months in this position with Entergy. I've been with Entergy for about 8 years, though. But I am the senior most employee on our small team besides Cherie. So that's always very funny. And then we also have Mike Baggett, who is over our ETech program. You may have heard of that. Our electrification incentives are through the ETech program. And the ETech program allows you to have some other incentives based on things like forklifts and those kind of things. So let's go back to the buses. A little bit about Entergy. We've been around for a long time, started out as Arkansas Power and Light. I'm from Arkansas, so go APL. We have about 3 million customers, 12,000 employees. We provide a whole lot of power on a whole lot of miles. And we cover some of Arkansas, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Texas. So I just kind of wanted to give you all a little bit of an update on what the electric vehicle market is looking like for Louisiana. Here's a fun chart from the U.S. Department of Energy showing you from 2016 to 2024, which is the most recent data that we have available. You can see that steady incline. So you've got about 11,600 vehicles in Louisiana that are registered as EV vehicles. And then out of school buses, you've got about 6,800 school buses in the state. This is from the WRI and the ESBI. And about 300 of those buses are committed to be EV buses, which is very exciting. And I know we've had a lot with the different types of funding and stuff. Everybody's familiar with that, but we're starting to see those turn a corner, and I think we'll see those numbers continue to go up. So for Entergy, probably the easiest and the most attractive part of our being able to partner with you guys is our incentives as well for the different chargers. We've got, if you have a level 2 charger, it's $250 per port. DC fast chargers that are less than 50 kilowatts, we've got $750 per port. And then if they're over 50, $1,500 per port. If you're in New Orleans, we do have a pilot program there that increases those incentives. That was something that the city council worked with us on. So I can provide you with those offline if you would like. And then also, these are cash incentives, very easy. All you need is proof that you purchased the charger and you had it installed. You apply online. It's really simple. And your cash incentive is processed within 4 to 6 weeks. We also have some special rates that are available. For Louisiana as a whole, we have the demand adjustment rider. And then for New Orleans, we have a charging infrastructure and a demand adjustment rider as well, which I'm going to walk you through. For demand adjustment riders, so Richie touched on this. Basically, that demand charge is the highest amount, it's based on the highest amount of energy that you pull at one time. Let's say if you're at home and you're running your washer, your dishwasher, your air conditioner is set on a crisp 65 and you're pulling a lot on a hot summer day, you're going to see a higher bill, right? Well, we're going to add EV buses, and we're going to add something that is pulling on the grid at a high rate, as he mentioned as well. Sometimes slower is better for these. You're going to be charged based on that maximum amount that you were pulling from the grid. So what a demand adjustment rider does is it, for up to 5 years, it kind of gives you a little break on that. And I can go into the specific details, but honestly, it's kind of boring. But just know there's something out there that can help you with that. And for about 5 years, not be pulling from that peak amount for you. And then also, I mentioned we have the CI rider for New Orleans. So that one is where we had Entergy owned charging infrastructure. I'll let you know there is not one in Louisiana yet. We have this also in Arkansas and in Mississippi. In Mississippi, we do have a couple customers under it. I am finding that it is a more expensive route for the schools. And I know that that is something that, of course, y'all are looking at cost effectiveness. I'm the child of a public school teacher. So I know how strapped your budgets are. If it's something you want to look into, I'm happy to discuss it, but most likely you're going to be better off owning and operating your own chargers. Let's see. So definitely things to think about while you're doing this, just echoing what Richie was talking about, your inventory needs, deciding how you're going to do this. Are you going to own it yourself? Are you going to go through a third party? Are you interested in looking at your utility owned if it's available to you? Deciding the number of buses. What is your load going to be with those buses? What would it look like if you tried to charge them in 2 hours versus 6 hours? Looking at when your buses are idle during the day. Deciding the site layout. Mentioning, do you already have concrete there? Are you going to have to be boring under concrete in order to lay the conduit for these chargers? All of these things are just things that you need to just start making a list. Start making, this is what I have available to me. And then early on, as Richie said, reach out to us at your utility, because we will be able to send out an engineer who is experienced at this. We can quickly look at your area of where you're looking at and see what load you have available to you, if we're going to be looking at any distribution upgrades or heaven forbid any substation upgrades or anything like that. So just get in touch with us early. It's not going to hurt. That's what we're here for, and we can help you to kind of see what some of those main roadblocks are going to be for you in the beginning. And then also, you know, should you decide to go through with this and everything, and we are able to do a rider demand adjustment or something like that, we're finalizing agreements, of course, and you can move ahead with the project as soon as we get all those right-of-way easements and all that fun stuff done. I'm going to hold for questions because I know we're going to have questions at the end. And then also, here's some key contacts for Entergy. You will receive these presentations after the call, so you'll have that information available to you. But just thank you for being interested in EV buses, and we're here to help. And
Awesome.
I'll turn it back over.
Thank you, Amanda. And finally, before we move into the Q&A for the utility panel, we have David Latona with Demco. So if you are in Demco territory, he is the one who can help you out.
Hey,
Really?
thank you so much. It is wonderful to be here. I appreciate the invite. Richie and Amanda, thank you so much for being the experts in the field. Unfortunately, David is the talking head. So, but I do have resources with the electric cooperatives. Just real quick, Demco is it's the largest electric co-op in the state of Louisiana, but also one of the largest in the nation. We're large for a co-op, and that's not bragging rights. That's just saying we're here to be able to serve projects of your size and scale and scope. But we have 120,000 meters in the southeast corner of Louisiana surrounding the capital. So you can imagine those parishes that we serve as 7 parishes surrounding East Baton Rouge. Anything and everything you want to know about DEMCO itself, I don't want to get deep into that, but at demco.org, please feel free to explore there. We have business development folks that are available to work with you on whatever project you might be working on. We're familiar with grants and applications and processes there. But just to speak specifically of electrifying I know they've been called bus depots. It's a big interest in the world of education, but I would give some advice would be that just remember, those of you budget managers, listen up. You can save, just like Amanda and Richie said, you can save a lot of money by working with your utility early, because sometimes that location is critical. Distance from that substation or the technology that they understand they're willing to help you with, to help you select a site that's conducive for charging buses. But then also just think of 3 things, right? Sizing, that's your buses and the routes they take, the power they use. It's just some homework you need to do before you decide on where you're going to be. Timing, the timing that you'll charge. Many utilities have a time of use rate. It can be very beneficial for something like charging an electric vehicle, especially when you've got an army of something larger like a school bus. DEMCO has a time of use rate. I'm sure others do, but working with that utility will give them the opportunity to guide you in making that selection and making your charging plan something that saves you money, like Amanda was saying. When demand charges are involved and other things are involved with charging an electric vehicle, they can be manipulated in a good way so that you're charging at the good time and you're making best use of your electricity dollar. And then planning, of course, get a group of people that are in your district that can be assigned to a committee, because this is, I don't want to overwork this, but to have a group from different departments strategically thinking about budgets, routes. I mean, you want a transportation person, you want a budget person, then you also want a logistics person that's going to say, are these buses going to be able to take 2 loads of children from their homes to their schools? Or is it going to be just 1? Is there, like Richie mentioned, charging times? You don't want them to be sitting idle when they could be charging. Just making the best use of that can be beneficial for the school district as a whole. Now, I mentioned that we are an electric co-op. We have the resources of the National Rural Electric Cooperative Association, where I, the non-electric vehicle expert, reached out to find our expert in the field who is available to us at any time. But she gave me a few notes, and some of that's what I've covered. But also, I want to make sure I got all this from her. Starting with route analysis, that's a big deal in school districts, especially when you're talking about charging windows. You know, to refuel a bus with diesel or unleaded, I'm not familiar, maybe it takes a lot less time than it does to charge an electric bus. And that's just something you have to consider when you're mapping these routes for your bus drivers. And again, to reiterate, she said this a lot, engage with your utility early. And look, the business development folks at DEMCO understand that also. They work with folks every day to help them. We want you to get the best of your energy dollar when you're working with DEMCO, and working with our business development folks is certainly beneficial in that. All that can be made available through LCF, and I'll make sure that Ann gets that information to share. But that being said, I'll be available for questions, and hopefully we can help you get that ESB project off the ground.
Thank you so much, David. So this is where we're going to kind of open it up for some questions, and I have some questions prepared for you all on the panel, and you can just take turns answering them, or just raise your hand and say that you'll take this one. So first question: what factors lead to success in charging for school districts? I know a bunch of you have gone through this again, but let's summarize it again. What factors lead to success in charging for school districts?
I can take some of that, and then I'll let the experts wrap it up. How about that? Again, the energy needs. I know you likely do not have an electrical engineer on staff at the school district. That's okay. Utilities are certainly here to help. Make sure you do that and understand that load on that system, because, like I said, the decision to purchase land or lease land or use land can be very critical in the expenses you incur with your utility in running that power to your facility.
Awesome.
I'll chime in here, and I covered it a bit in my introduction, but I think careful site selection and coordination with your utility is really key. And then for the ongoing success, optimizing the charging. I can't emphasize enough where you could really end up in a situation that's the opposite of how ESBs are advertised, where you're paying more than diesel for your energy to drive, right? It sounds crazy, but if you put in that ultra fast 150 kilowatt charger and only use it for an hour, you could be paying, up to $1 kilowatt hour or more, depending on your utility. So make sure that you optimize the charging and you place it in the right location.
Yeah, and I'll piggyback off of what y'all are saying too. I think knowing what you're spending right now, look at what your budget is for your buses. What capital do you have invested? What are you looking to have to replace in the near future? If you have equipment that's, been around for 20 years and it's about to go out, or if you just purchased a brand new fleet of buses and, they've got a useful life that's going to be for a while, those are things you need to consider. And I definitely think I like the approach, David, that was talking about a committee. This is going to take a lot of different expertise from your group. You're going to have maintenance with these. They're just like anything else. They're not going to 100% of the time run. I wish we lived in a perfect world. I would love it if everything that I owned ran 100% of the time. But maintenance is going to look different on these. You've got things like software updates, your pumps on the actual charger, they have prongs and things that can break off. And it's not as simple as going down to the hardware store or to the auto parts store where you've got a plethora of things to choose from. Now you're dealing with a technology that's a little bit more specific, and it's going to be a little bit more difficult to get the equipment for and the replacement parts. So I think know what you're spending now, know what your goal is on savings, and then plan through with, okay, what am I looking at as a cost of what would I love to have and what can I afford to have? And is it physically responsible for the school?
Yeah, Amanda, your point on, knowing what you're spending is really important, because I think a lot of these projects never get off the ground because building that business case is a little bit challenging and outside of the wheelhouse of a fleet manager at a utility, or excuse me, a fleet manager at a school district.
Yeah.
So, knowing what you spend and work with the utility to help get an idea what you will end up spending under electric. Utilities can provide model bills. It's not something that everybody loves doing because it can be a risky act. You're only as good as the inputs on a model bill, right? So you have to be
Right.
really careful about how you use a model bill, because you could be in a whole nother world if you end up using those buses different than you project, right? And then, and as part of the business case too, I've heard from fleet managers they want the fastest charge possible because that's a little bit less of a learning curve, a little bit more like that traditional experience. But another item is sometimes they'll push those buses into the shortest routes possible, right? Out of range anxiety. And I think that's, a recipe for unsuccessful deployment too, because you really need to utilize those buses to make those costs back, right? So you need to have really just select the routes that are long enough but not too long, so you get the right utilization. And then you'll hear things too from fleet managers like, well, what about, I can't go electric because, every week during football season, we, drive the football team all the way across the state. It's like, well, that's not a bus that we propose being electric. You should think about a mixed fleet. You don't have to go all into electric. You don't have to go all into diesel. You should use, the right fuel for the right duty cycle. So that's really important.
Fantastic. Yes. And if you remember from our last session, we did talk about when you have a pilot project, what that sweet spot is for the number of buses that you should pilot. And the agreement is, between 5 and 7 buses to get started so you can really figure out how this works for you, get used to it, and then slowly start adding them when you realize what routes it's working on and which ones it would not. So very awesome. Very good points. So discussing some of these issues, what are some of the roadblocks that your corporate fleets, can often come across when they're dealing with their charging infrastructure that could translate over to electric school buses?
Well, I think sometimes the sticker shock can be a big surprise to school districts or really any sort of fleet. The sky really is the limit on what you can pay for these. You can dramatically reduce the cost through some like clever, early planning. But if you have your heart set on, very fast DC fast charging in a location that's, difficult to serve by utility, be it, an area with congestion on a feeder or even, just the complete other side of your facility from where the power is served from, the cost can really, really, really go up, right? So it's a sticker shock on charging. I know that grants in the past have included some money for charging infrastructure, and that's helped a lot. I don't know if that's going to continue or not. I'm far from an expert on the school transportation grants that are in process, but the capital costs are a really important part, and I look forward to hearing from the charging panel coming up.
Yeah, I would agree with that with Richie that a lot of that the unknown may become known with some thought and planning, like we said, some facilities and maintenance and the things you don't think about that are very different from the traditional combustion engine vehicle that's bringing children to school. Also, in the construction of the charging locations too. Just again, you never know if there needs to be a new transformer up the line. That's a tremendous expense for a utility, or the conductor's not large enough to reach that far. So again, that planning process might be able to prevent some of those roadblocks, hopefully.
Yeah, maintenance is probably one of the biggest ones that I babysit the all of the public chargers for Entergy. We have a variety of different brands and different maintenance providers. And I'm bringing people in from California, Virginia, all over the place. We have the wonderful, wonderful Project Gumbo that LCF is working on to get local technicians. Just know that is definitely something that will come up for you. Mm-hmm. And having someone dedicated to be able to be watching those chargers, making sure that they are charging the buses correctly, that they have firmware updates. A lot of those you can just do from an app, but you have to be standing at the charger and you have to be pressing all these fun buttons and everything. It's not too complicated, but just know that it's not a set it and forget it. It's not a 90s commercial for a rotisserie chicken. So.
For the record, I do like the fact that Amanda said babysitting these chargers, because that is exactly what it is, right?
What it feels like sometimes, isn't it?
Yeah, a lot of these DC fast chargers have serviceable or service schedules, right? So they have coolant fans, maybe even a coolant loop. They'll have filters. All these things need to be maintained, and so having a service contract on your chargers is really important. And another thing, training, I think this was covered on some of the prior sessions, but it is really important to train your drivers and facilities folks on how what the procedures are for this. It sounds really simple, get out of the bus and plug it in, but they've never really had to do that before, and it's so easy to forget. And I think just about every single deployment of fleet chargers, drivers have forgotten to plug them in. And guess what? The charger's broken the next morning because the vehicle's not charged, right? So you see it all the time. It's a completely normal and human thing to do. I've done it with my EV once or twice over the 3 years I've owned it, but having a procedure can help make sure that that doesn't happen.
And thank you for the pitch about the Gumbo project. And we
Yes.
will be announcing a summer workshop that is geared towards school districts for electric vehicle charging through the Gumbo project with Baton Rouge Community College. Our curriculum has been adopted and accepted by SAE, a certifying body for service maintenance and repair, and we will soon have a curriculum out for installation. So we're really excited about that. So if you want to learn more, you can reach out to me or anyone at Louisiana Clean Fuels. All right, and so we're going to move on to the next question here. What are some of the costs, the common costs that school districts may forget to factor in when it comes to the charging side? So I'm probably going to ask this question again to Jack and Drew, but so I want to ask it from y'all's point of view, from the utility point of view first.
Sure, I'll just cover a few things that are obvious, right? The number of buses is going to be in that planning process for when you are determining how you want to do this, whether it's a pilot program, if you're applying for a grant, what is that match? Sometimes those are surprising, but you got to make sure you have that analysis certainly done. Also, the capacity, when you have a certain number of buses or a certain requirement at the charging depot or the bus depot, you want to make sure that you have worked with that utility prior to budgeting, right? You want to make sure that you understand what it takes to get that capacity at that location. I can't say that strong enough that sometimes those construction costs before the project even starts could be eye-popping. And then estimating the charger quantities, of course, that goes with your planning. What kind of routes, what kind of buses, and what kind of chargers are going to be required with that transportation plan.
I've mentioned demand charges a few times, and I'm gonna hammer that point home one more time, just because how important it is for fleet projects. Your demand charge is a fixed component on your bill. If you have 10 chargers that are 20 kilowatts each, that's 200 kilowatts of demand you'll probably hit. And if you are utilizing those chargers, 6, 8, 10, 12 hours a day, those demand charges won't be so important because they're going to be used a lot. So you have an energy charge that will spread out those costs. If you have 10 200 kilowatt chargers, you're looking at a 2 megawatt project. You can't drive these buses enough to make up that demand charge, essentially, right? So right sizing that is, it could be a surprise, I think, if you get really far down a project and you're set on your path and you don't right size it and you end up seeing that bill. I think you'd be surprised. An additional component too is there's a ratchet often where you're stuck with that demand charge for 6 months or longer if you hit it once, right? So what you can do, maybe if you want to have fast charging, you can use some software like managed charging solutions to make sure that all the chargers aren't at max capacity at the same time and kind of create like a ceiling. That can help a lot to avoid that issue. But I can't emphasize enough because it's just an area where we've definitely had to intervene on projects to make sure, schools don't go down the wrong path.
Thank you, Richie. All right, so we're gonna wrap this up with a lightning round of this last question before we move into our 5-minute break and a little quiz for you all. Because now, if you've been to all these sessions, we like to give you little pop quizzes right in the middle. Any final advice that you'd like to give a school district who is starting this process from scratch?
Certainly explore what is out there. I mean, you guys know better than any the grant opportunities that exist, the incentives with the utilities that you're going to work with, but then also start with that route analysis. I don't want to speak like I'm a public school district expert. However, my wife is a kindergarten teacher, so I know a little bit, not a lot. Engage with the utility early. I'm not going to say that enough. I think Richie and Amanda said it as well, but just we're here to help. We want success with a project like this. One, it's exciting, but two, it's what we do every day to help those communities. Certainly, when you're working with school groups and school districts, it's something exciting for us, but also it's the future.
Awesome.
Yeah. I would say reach out to, if you have an account manager at your utility, catch with them and let them know you're considering a project. This is before you've made any design decisions. And something they can do for you is, take a look at all the locations in your school district that are served by the utility and help identify where there's, capacity to charge these vehicles, right? So could really drive what your deployment looks like. Maybe one site can support 25 and maybe one site can support 10. Or maybe one site can't support them at all and don't, apply for them at that location. I think that's the right way to approach these. It's maybe not ideal to have the utility help make you make design decisions like that, but it's just the way that the costs end up working for line extensions like this. So,
Thank you, Richie.
Yeah, open communication with your utility early on. Make sure that we can give you, like Richie's talking about and David's talking about, the best locations. Be flexible. Decide what your flexibility is. If you're not in a position to be flexible, that's okay. This may not be the right time. Look at not just what this is going to impact in the next year, but what it's going to impact in the next 5 to 10 years. I would say shiny is not always better. So the more expensive the charger does not mean the better the charger. You need the right charger for your particular location and for your particular usage needs. And ask questions. Always ask questions. Don't take anything for granted. No question is too ignorant or anything like that. Make sure that you're understanding and that you can wrap your head around what this is going to look like for your school district.
Awesome. Thank you. And just a reminder, if you all in our audience here have any questions for the panelists, you can pop it in the Q&A and we will get to it before the end of our session today. So now we're going to move into our final panel of the day, but not final presentation. We have Jack Hepson with BTC Power. He is the account manager for BTC. And we have Drew Blake with InCharge, also an account executive. And they are going to be answering all of your questions. But first, we are going to turn it over to these two guys. If they have slides to share with you, we're going to get started with you first, Drew.
So my name is Drew Blake. I'm with InCharge Energy. Just going to go through a few things about the company a little bit, and then we'll talk about what you guys see as you're going through your EV bus projects. So we, our core competency, I believe, is working with EV buses. We have very good relationship with all the major manufacturers, whether you use IC Bus or Thomas or Bluebird or the new ones, Ride. We've done quite a bit of the EPA funding projects, over a third of them. We're working with over 400 schools, 42 states. So that is kind of our bread and butter there as far as the school bus projects. One of the things that kind of sets us apart a little bit, we can do pretty much the whole turnkey project. We have an EPC team that can help you design your site, basically plan out the size of the chargers, get your charging schedules and your routing analysis done. We can actually provide the hardware and the software, although we can be agnostic about that. We can use if you want to use different software in our hardware or vice versa, or someone else's hardware and software. We can manage that project as well. And then we also, another one of our main core competencies is maintenance of chargers. Any brand, we have our own technicians and our own trucks that we roll around the country. Move on here. So when you guys are looking at doing an EV bus project, there's kind of a process of with the EPC team, where we would send somebody out, do a site assessment, see what kind of power you have coming into the facility. Just kind of figuring out from there, like where you would lay things out, and kind of what would go into that construction process if we are doing that turnkey. We'd also help looking at grants and incentives, working with the utilities, having that kind of interface as well, and then giving you that quote for the whole project, whether it just be the installation and the chargers, or whether it be the actual construction with boring and trenching and all that good stuff. So the other thing you guys want to look at, and I think it's been touched on a little bit, is getting the right equipment with your buses, and figuring out, if you have some buses that are going on longer routes, depending on the hardware you choose, if there's power modules that you can kind of smart load, you can have certain buses receive a faster charge to get topped off faster if they need to run an afternoon route or something like that. Time shifting is the other big one. If you're trying to avoid, your peak to charge time, ideally you'd want to charge overnight, right? So making sure that you manage that so you can safely transport the students without having to pay the highest charge times. And then if you can't afford a utility upgrade, you can kind of manage the site load to kind of make sure that you can charge those buses safely and still have enough power during the day and still avoid that peak. So the other piece of it too is the grants and financing. So we do have another round of EPA federal funding that is coming up that we're working with folks on, and then we also work with some financing groups that will actually purchase the buses, purchase the infrastructure, and kind of lease that back to the school. So if CapEx is an issue, that's something that you can look at as well. I'm just going to kind of churn through some of these real quick. But yeah, we do anything from the actual construction of the site to the bolt down. And so basically that process is you have someone coming out with doing a site assessment. We have that comprehensive quote. We do the engineering and permitting once that's agreed to, the construction, commissioning the chargers, and getting you on track to charge your buses, timing that up with your bus deliveries. And then maintenance is the other piece that you always want to make sure you're looking at. Sometimes you're looking at preventive maintenance, sometimes you're looking at comprehensive maintenance that covers your labor. So that can be a big kind of sticker shock moment if the charger goes down, you're not able to charge all your buses, you're using your spares, you have to get a technician out with a truck roll, all those things that go into that process if you don't have labor coverage. Just kind of going to go through here, but we can do everything from annual preventive maintenance visits to full labor coverage to, in larger deployments and actual dedicated tech on site. And then just a little bit from the dashboard, looking at your smart charging, state of charge, you can see how full your buses are. Your administrator can actually check that overnight, log in, make sure everything's functioning correctly. So when you come in, your buses are at full state of charge. Oops. And just a quick peek at some of the chargers. We can do everything from AC, DC chargers. We're doing a lot of vehicle to grid. That's probably been touched on a little bit. We just put in a deployment in Oklahoma, and we're working on one in Colorado where you're doing vehicle to building. And then split systems where you can actually, with the battery storage as well, you can actually, shed and basically kind of store some battery and then utilize that during peak time, so you're not using from the grid as well. And I'll kind of stop there and kick it over to Jack.
Well, awesome. I'm Jack Hepson. I'm with BTC Power. We do a very similar portion of the business as In Charge. So Drew already covered a good chunk of the important topics, but I wanted to take a look at this from kind of a more introspective version on how can you best achieve this. There's a lot of offerings in the market between level 2 and DC fast charging, a lot of different software companies and so on. And it makes that decision-making process that much more difficult when you're going into something like this for the first time. So for choosing the right charger type, what we've seen a lot of our customers do is potentially go one path, whether it's incentive based or, just pricing overall, a conversation in that realm to reduce costs and things along those lines, just to go with for example, level 2 AC charger. If you have an AC charger for a lot of use cases, that's phenomenal. It will take roughly 8 to 12 hours overnight, depending on the vehicle. Best use case is going to be that overnight depot where you have a lot of time on the clock to be able to refill these vehicles. Infrastructure costs, a great portion of this it's a lot lower than a DC fast charger. Equipment cost is also significantly lower, and the grid demand is also going to be much lower than if you go with the DC fast charging approach. However, on the inverse of that, it allows for a lot less flexibility in regards to getting your vehicles out of the lot that much quicker. So what we've seen a very successful approach be is a lot of these larger charging depots, if they have 10 plus vehicles, they'll have the bulk of the charging on site be a level 2 unit, an AC charger, and then maybe have 1 or 2 DC fast chargers for those emergency use cases or longer routes where they may really need that. And a lot of times when we're looking at this from our perspective, it comes down to what sort of incentives there are. If a state or local incentive offers you enough a benefit to cover a level 2 charger, but you'd have to pay for the bulk of the DC fast charger out of pocket, that becomes a little bit more difficult for a lot of organizations to be able to justify. In the long-term operation of these chargers, a really important conversation to have with your vendor, and more specifically on the EVSE side, is what are the warranties? What do they look like? A lot of companies have standard parts only warranties. Some have full labor, full travel. It really depends on what provider you're using. So getting specific early on to understand what's covered for what time period and what would be out of pocket in the case something does go wrong is a very important topic to cover. Another point, a lot of customers will use technicians that may not be qualified to work on this exact equipment. And depending on the warranty and the contracts that you have with your hardware manufacturer, that could potentially void a warranty. Most of the hardware manufacturers in the industry are offering some sort of training or certification program that'll allow your district's team to get trained up and basically get the gold star saying, hey, they're good to work on it. They're not going to void the warranty in case something goes wrong. So learning what the extended warranties and what is required of you as a customer to keep your units up and running is a very important thing to get out of the way when you're trying to understand, the holistic view of this approach. The numbers, depending on what you need. For example, certain federal funding grants, state funding grants may require a mandatory uptime. The number you'll see a lot is 97%. So there are certain SLAs, warranties, and agreements that can be drawn up to ensure that level of uptime is held. As far as charging schedule goes, one thing that we've seen in the early days of these rollouts is just avoiding peak rates. From 4 to 9 p.m. it varies very much depending on your district and your utility provider, but being able to properly plan your route schedules instead of just plugging in and charging the second they get back to the lot can save organizations a lot of money in the long run by avoiding those peak demand charges. It also allows your drivers to ensure that they're driving on a full battery the next morning. So by looking ahead just a little bit, you're able to use between the software tools you'll find dynamic load management, properly planning routes, and keeping a reserve buffer. You're able to ensure that all your vehicles will be ready to go by the next school day or next trip without having to pay anything higher than you need to. And then viewing the approach, a lot of school districts and a lot of companies just in the market overall don't have experts on EV charging. It's a very new position. It's a very new field. So having an in-house expert is not really the typical case. So there's a few options. I mean, the two main ones would be going with a outsourced provider. Like Drew was saying, companies can do turnkey approaches. They're able to come in, assist you with the design, install, and all sorts of portions of this project, as opposed to managing it yourself. There's a couple key pros and cons with it. For example, if you go with a provider, it could be a little bit more expensive as their running point on the operation, and there may be a little bit less flexibility to swap things out as opposed to piecemealing it yourself. However, a lot of times when you go with that self-managed approach, it will likely save a little bit of money, but if it's your first rodeo, if it's something that go wrong, whereas hiring a dedicated contractor, a partner, or operator, whatever you'd like to call it, can help reduce a lot of those pain points, especially for initial site rollouts. That's all for me.
Awesome, fantastic. And just occasionally you got a little garbled every now and then, but we still could hear and understand everything.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just saw it said a couple times it flashed. My internet wasn't looking too great.
Yeah. Well, great. We could hear everything, so fantastic. So now we're going to move into a little bit to a Q&A with our EVSE panel. And just want to reiterate for the audience, what are the benefits and drawbacks of using a level 2 or a DC fast charger?
Yeah. And since there's only two of us, we can probably both kind of jump back and forth here. Level 2, obviously, I think Jack mentioned it is a cheaper deployment as far as the infrastructure side, especially if let's say if your site only has 240 or 208, it can be a lot easier on the front end getting in there. But DC, I think on the medium and lower powers give you a little bit more redundancies. Some of the dual port stations that can power share. You can have some extra ports in case something goes down, or if something, let's say you have a 60 kilowatt charger that with two ports, and you have one bus that is lower than normal and needs to get charged up, you can deliver all 60 kilowatts to that bus. There's a little bit more flexibility, I think, on the DC fast charging.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it really comes down to flexibility. If you have the funding, the ability, the means to achieve the DC charging portion, the upside's a lot higher. It allows you a lot more wiggle room when it comes to bus route timing, size of the vehicle. Those larger vehicles, depending on how long the routes are, there's a lot of variables that could make it difficult for just a regular standard L2 to charge a fleet overnight. So there's a lot of variation there. But like I said in my portion, I think a lot of what we're seeing is a district, a fleet depot, whatever it may be, will have a dozen level 2s and maybe 2 or 3 DC chargers for more of those emergency use and opportunity charging cases.
Awesome. So I'm going to throw a question at y'all that I didn't send you ahead of time, but it's an easy one. When a school district is looking at selecting the charging equipment and the software provider, sometimes the bus companies may have proprietary chargers that they use that they recommend, but if not, if they're free to choose whatever chargers they want, how can a school district kind of rate and score the companies? Because there's been a lot of companies that have come in, they go out of business, and then you have the people like you with BTC that y'all have been around a really long time. What are the criteria and how can a school district suss that out and figure out who the stable companies are and what equipment is going to last and have committed people continue to be able to support them into the future?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. We have seen a lot of hardware providers, have a very quick rise and then they just vanish off the face of the earth and their customers are left stranded. A lot of times that has to do with just the management and, sometimes they get bought out by a private equity or something like that and things may change that's out of their control. But as far as good key signs to look at, I always think how many ports do they have out in the field right now? What data do they provide us, in like a typical product pitch? What's their uptime? What's their service look like? The non-sales staffing, I think, is a big indicator because a lot of companies will hire dozens of salespeople to flood the market, but they don't have service or these other important groups in-house. So for me, that's kind of a look. But another one is a lot of the businesses in this industry are owned by, a different company. For example, BTC is owned by a company called E.ON. They're the biggest utility in Germany. So our parent company is not going to fail, which, typically provides our customer with a little bit more a sense of safety because if they're not going to fail, it would be harder for us to. But there's so many variables that sometimes it is difficult to see, in the early stages.
Mhm.
Yeah,
True.
I think he covered that very well. The fear is, the Slick website been around a year or two, and then you're left with a stranded asset a couple years in. We've seen that in the industry, unfortunately, in the commercial side as well with some of the DC fast providers. So to his point, yeah, like who's been around, can you get some references? Are they established enough that you're seeing them on the major cooperative purchasing agreements? Can you get some references? And then talking to the bus dealers as well. Sometimes some of them may push a provider or something proprietary, but your bus dealer rep is going to know kind of who's been around, who's been solid, and what their other school districts that they've serviced are experiencing.
Awesome. Thank you. So, a couple of you have mentioned that maintenance teams really need to understand the warranties and who can work on the chargers. Can you go into a little bit more of the why and in what instances, what types of things are most likely going to be allowed by maintenance, by the warranties, and which ones, what kind of activities by the local maintenance team, for the school district would specifically not generally be allowed and why?
I
Yeah.
mean,
So,
go ahead, Drew.
yeah. So yeah, I think he touched on this on his slideshow as well. As far as the warranties go, you always want to know where you're standing with parts and labor. So you usually have a factory warranty from the part standpoint, not often on the labor. And I would always look at and most of the grants, like you'll see with the EPA funding, they'll require a certain period of parts and labor warranty so that they know that this funding is going to cover the at least 5 years of these. But you always want to check on the maintenance side. Is there a labor coverage option versus a preventive maintenance option? And making sure who's servicing that. There are some hardware manufacturers that are kind of pretty much outsourcing the entirety of their maintenance. And depending on what part of the country you're in, that can be hit or miss. Sometimes they'll just farm them out, and whoever on their network just grabs a call will just head out there, and they don't know who's going out there. So um, where possible, you want somebody who's in their own vehicle with their own technician working on their own stations, and then asking what other hardware are you certified to work on, in case you have like a mixed fleet of chargers.
Yeah. For us, we kind of viewed it a little differently than the bulk of the industry. We put a lot of effort into our training program. There's distance learning, there's also an in-person training program, but part of that, what we realized is you're never going to get faster service than somebody who already works on site. No matter how fast we want to scramble somebody, if you have someone on site, you're going to get it done and fixed that much quicker. And from what we've seen, that can cause a little bit of confusion as to, oh, well, if they do this, if people work on their own devices, can everybody? It depends on the terms, and every hardware provider is going to be different on what it says. But, typical small fixes, cycling the machine, that kind of stuff is not of concern for warranty work. But if you're talking about replacing parts that you haven't been trained on, I don't see us canceling warranties frequently. I don't think I've ever personally seen it, but I could only imagine that if an untrained technician came in and tried to swap a screen and broke something and caused, $5,000, $10,000 in damage, you'd be very hard pressed to find a manufacturer that would want to support that after that error had been made. So it's really typically a case by case basis, depending on the level of understanding and your agreement between the supplier and, your business. But it's not something that I've seen rear an ugly head ever.
Awesome. Thank you. So, tell me a little bit more about managed charging and who will the school district work with to set up their managed charging program? And what are some key things that you want the listeners to know?
So I would say I would start with, and I love my bus OEMs, but be conservative on what they're going to tell you as far as range, and be realistic, and factor in, for you guys maybe a little bit more on the hot weather in the summer. If they tell you that it's going to get 210 miles, maybe plan on 160 kind of thing. And when you factor that in, because I've run into some scenarios where people are, basically looking at it on a spreadsheet, and you end up with a bunch of level 2 chargers, and they're limping back, and trying to charge midday at very expensive rates because they didn't factor in the air conditioning, or in some cases the heating, or doing the preconditioning routines with the software to keep it so you're leaving it like 98% instead of 85. I would start with that, and then doing that route analysis, factoring in the bus, factoring in the chargers, and figuring out, does it make sense to only charge at night, or if you're running some scenarios where you're running, the high school, the middle school, the elementary school 2-hour break, and then doing all three again, well, you might need a pretty fast charger if you're going to manage that. So once you have your arms around that, then then it's a lot easier to do that scheduled charging within the software. But those are the things that I would look at first.
Yeah, I think that that summed it up pretty nicely. Most of the hardware providers, most, not all, are happy to be agnostic with the software backend. So if there's something that the district finds that they'd prefer, that might not even be partnered with a company like BTC or InCharge, more often than not, we're happy to integrate with them and get the understanding and, build it out so our customers are happy. But in order to really capitalize on that, you need that understanding that Drew was talking about of, hey, how far are we going? Do we need to charge midday? And learning that prior to actually getting the chargers on site is crucial, because if you go with, for example, a full level 2 setup, and in reality you needed access to fast charging, it's a lot more expensive to undo than to just do it the correct way from the start.
Awesome. Last two questions. What comes first, the hardware selection or the software selection? Is there a time where those choices would be made separately, or are they generally more of a package deal?
Typically, from what I've seen, it's been a package deal. They're normally worked on simultaneously. But just from my role in the hardware realm, typically they'll narrow in on a few hardwares before they even start thinking about software. But a lot of companies will offer, a comprehensive suite. They do the hardware and software. We're very agnostic in how we work in regards to the back ends. But from what I've seen, is there's a lot more flexibility on that front. So my customers have spent a lot more due diligence and a lot more time understanding the hardware side, because worst case scenario, if you're in the field and you hate the software, it may be a mild inconvenience and a couple $100s, but that can get switched out, as opposed to the hardware. If you buy hardware that is unreliable and you hate it, that's a tens of thousands of dollars mistake. So I think the software should come in complement to the hardware.
Yeah, everything he said there makes sense. Especially in the era of OCPP compliance, just making sure the hardware can do that, so that you can make that change if you want to later on. And then, if you get into the more complex, battery storage and off-grid stuff, there's third parties that like a mobility house or someone like that that can manage that. So we've done scenarios where we're doing the construction, we don't do the hardware, and totally different outfit does the software. So it can be sliced up however you want to dice it.
Awesome. Last question. When a charger goes down at a school, what's the typical protocol?
Yeah, so and I'm sure our answer will probably be pretty similar, but for the most part, depending on what you're using for your software dashboard, it's typically you're hoping you selected a hardware and a software that's going to do some pre-diagnosis. It's going to flag these, but typically if you're experiencing an issue on site, you're going into your software backend, you are opening a case with that support, and unfortunately, the first thing you're always going to hear is, power cycling it and going through all those steps. But typically, you're the goal for whoever your maintenance provider is to pre-diagnose and see what you can fix remotely. And then if you need to, roll in a truck, and from there, once you have that diagnosis, you need somebody to go out there with parts, with the know-how to make that repair. It can be a few days.
Yeah, that was pretty spot on. The only thing I'll say is the timing and everything, the order of operations will really depend on the ultimate contract breakdown. A lot of our customers, like you were saying, with the pre-diagnosis, a lot of our software partners will proactively restart restart the unit because something's showing that it's a little bit off. So they'll do that proactively to prevent any sort of crash or shutdown or anything along those lines. So there are ways to kind of quell those issues prior to them becoming catastrophic. But yeah, as far as the order of operations, I completely agree with Drew on that front.
Awesome. Thank you guys. Very, very informative. So if there's any questions, like burning questions that you all have that our speakers today did not cover, please feel free to put them in the Q&A, or we can save them for next week when we have our open office hour. But next up, and our final speaker of the day, we have Alex with EPRI, and he's going to be talking to you about vehicle to grid and all those capabilities. I know you've heard a lot about the ability for these buses to be able to serve as batteries and power things. So we're going to learn all about that next. So go ahead. Let me see. I'm going to stop my share. And Alex, you can take it away.
All right. Thank you very much. So
Welcome.
as mentioned, Alex Mirko, I'm an engineer scientist with EPRI. And for those of you that aren't familiar with us, and I would not expect for some of you to be, we stand for Electric Power Research Institute. We are just an independent nonprofit energy organization, and we're mission, our goal is to figure out ways that we can ensure that the public has clean, safe, reliable, affordable electricity that's equitably accessible to all. So just a little bit of background on who we are. And while we have a couple of different school bus projects, I think the one that I'm going to focus on today is in partnership with Dominion Electric and their school bus project that started a few years ago and are now in the kind of completed stages as they move on to more advanced demonstrations. So they were the electric utility that was involved. They're in Virginia, for those of you that aren't familiar. And in this particular demonstration, they actually owned the powertrain of the school bus and the charging infrastructure at the site, so that they were able to, as part of their pilot, do everything that they wanted to with it within reason. And then the school districts owned the balance of the buses in this case. There were also a number of vendor partners involved, from the battery and charger manufacturers to the charge management platform providers, and all of those that were kind of part of that discussion as we went through this process in the early days. And then EPRI was call ourselves the research lead, if you will. So we were the ones that were kind of helping to guide some of the research question development and then test plan development and actual execution of some of those tests to be able to analyze all the results and get back answers to those questions. So the project itself, it focused on a couple different things, but the first round of it was the 50 school bus deployment, where it was really just trying to understand V2G capabilities. And we were looking at the data from a number of school bus routes that were driving, even just kind of the regular baseline behaviors. The first bit, kind of setting a baseline to understand how were these used, and we'll have a few data points on those that we'll be able to share to know about those route length requirements and so forth. Then we also analyzed some of the system impacts from a grid perspective to know if they were able to be provided, if the electricity could be provided to the buses reliably, as well as what that would mean from the utility's perspective. And in their case, I guess a little bit of a spoiler in that there was very little harm in the installation of the buses, but they could even do full electrification of their fleets without much issue. However, their electric system is set up a little bit differently with some higher voltage distribution. So not all those results will be immediately transferable. And then finally, we documented a lot of the learnings from this project. So as it was one of the first times through for that utility, as well as for a number of us here at EPRI, we helped to develop commissioning checklists where firmware maybe wasn't up to date. And so making sure that that was an item that was part of their checklist and so forth was part of what we provided, as well as we helped to define what that interconnection process looked like, knowing that there's a difference between V2G and just your regular, I want to install a charger type of discussion that had to happen. We have a slide here with just a few of the fun facts, if you will, by the numbers. So as mentioned, 50 electric school buses. It actually expanded to be more than that in the second phase of the project. And these were spread out across the entire state of Virginia. It was part of the objective to find things that were in rural areas, in suburban areas, more urban areas, to see how that would differentiate items. Some that were in mountainous territory versus flat, so a wide kind of spectrum of investigation that we wanted to cover. There were a couple of stats that we'll get into on how long they were realistically driven, as opposed to how long the buses may be capable of driving. And then for this setup, we had DC fast chargers, and they were capable of up to 60 kilowatts of simultaneous power output. So this was their setup, and we'll kind of evaluate if that was of use or not. So I think this has been covered pretty well so far, so I'll kind of breeze through it. But essentially, there are a lot of considerations when it goes into your charging strategy, and there's those kind of high upfront costs that you're going to see from electrification. So fleet electrification, typically most of those costs are occurring upfront as you get all the hardware and software in place. And then from there, it's on how do you accumulate all the different savings. And so the first thing you could look at is just charger right sizing to reduce what that upfront cost would be, but then also participation in the utility programs that were mentioned, taking advantage of those utility incentives. And then the grid services piece is one of those attributes in which you might be able to recover some of the value. But the point that I'm going to drive home through most of this is that there's a wide range of complexity that's associated with all the different services, you can call them, that the bus can provide, either through managed charging or V2G, and not all of them have the same payback or reward. So just because something's more complex or flashy or new doesn't necessarily make it more valuable. And so that was one of the things we tried to understand in this project is what are those high value, low complexity wins? And to reemphasize from before, making sure that you have the ability to set charge schedules where you can look at time of use rates and make sure that you're either charging on cheap energy or not charging at least on those peak periods. If that's an offering for your tariff, that would make a strong value case, as well as just the charger right sizing, that by installing a lower power charger for most of your buses, you don't even have to worry as much about the demand charges because you would be maxed out at the limit of the charger, even if everything's charging simultaneously. Whereas if you do have higher power chargers, you might have to take into consideration, the values and set software limits or other things in order for that to be true. So those are the two easy wins, and we'll get into some of the grid services in just a moment. So when it comes to the hardware and infrastructure, I think we already covered that the higher power chargers have the ability to provide that additional flexibility. They might spike demand charges. You also might have additional costs when it comes to interconnection due to the potential need for higher capacity services, whether that's upgrades to lines or transformers or other things that might be necessary in order to supply that high power demand on top of just the chargers being more expensive. So consideration for what grid services or other services you're trying to provide with those buses on top of just your general fleet strategy for route requirements, turnaround experience, how often you need those to come in and get a quick boost before going out. All those considerations come together in one place. So there's a little bit of field data that we have just as a sample to kind of point you with what we're looking at. We would observe the buses over the course of many, many days. So this is just one snapshot of what a brief driving and then charging period look like. So all the spiky behavior up here is the power consumption in and out of the battery just as it's driving. But from a grid perspective, once it comes back in this green zone, we're purely at the 60 kilowatt charge rate for about an hour as it's working its way back up in SOC, and then it tapers off as it gets close to 100. But as we noted, this was probably not the best design from a cost effectiveness standpoint if your only consideration was charging, because within 1 hour, they were able to get back up to 90%. They didn't consume much. They only started at, they started at 100, but they went down to 60. So there was definitely additional room within that range for this particular route that they ran. And then within an hour, they were completely back. So they had several hours of lax time, even if they were to do this same route again in the afternoon. So that might have been a little bit needlessly quick for this one application, and that's a good thing that you can use as an example to understand, is this a necessary cost for us to install these DC fast chargers for every bus. Oh, sorry, animation there. So from the field data, one of the things that we looked at were just the distribution of values for the different buses. So each bus had its own characteristics as to what the trip would require, and some of them came back to charge midday, others just went straight through and would charge all the way, or go throughout the entire day without charging and then charge all the way up at night. And so we characterized that, and you can kind of see the distance per trip might vary, where there's some that are on the lower end, some that are on the higher end, and that depended largely on whether they were the 1 or 2 route type of bus charging pattern. The duration was usually just a couple hours of charging, so it wasn't particularly long. A misconception that we kind of stumbled across is how long it takes to charge from empty to full, but very often you're not doing that. And so looking at what the actual realistic discharge on either a typical day or the worst case day is an important consideration. And then the different SOC usage patterns. So this is going back to how do you size the battery for the buses that you're going to need. And in our case, most of them were maybe around 25% of their SOC usage. So there was a lot of headroom available either for grid services or just for kind of that safety buffer of not having to be concerned about the last few percentage of SOC being depleted. With all this, that's talking about just the kind of basic, maybe you do charging management, but just on a per bus basis. The next level of advancement being that charge management platform. And we had one of those as part of this project where we were able to do a few different things, but one is kind of adapt to realized usage patterns and live conditions. So you can see how much you need to charge and how long based on what the usage was that day from these platforms often. And that can be informative for how you manage your charging strategy. And then there's also the potential for fleet optimization across multiple vehicles. So as an example of that one, we had V2G testing periods where this was just a 2 or 1 hour duration period. And we wanted to see there are 4 buses at this particular site. How does the charge management platform allocate the power requirements across the different buses? Because there are any number of ways that it could do that. And this particular management platform attempted to find the SOC value of the buses and then dispatch accordingly, somewhat in proportion. And as different buses arrived and departed, so for instance, the teal color and the red color were a bus that either arrived after a few minutes or left and kind of unplugged, how did it adapt? And so you can see that the managed platform is targeting a dispatch of 100 kilowatts, which is this blue dotted line, and is adjusting the size of those as they go along. So there's definitely some maturity in that space and advancements that can be leveraged to provide the optimal benefit for your situation. Taking that to the next step, then we explore bulk grid services. So beyond just your maybe own bill optimization, looking into what are the other things that you could do with your bus. And so I'll go through the key points and then kind of back each one up with a data point behind it. But we start with just that V2G capable chargers have to go through the full interconnection process. So this isn't as straightforward as just installing a charger that's unidirectional, because you're treated like a large PV generator or a large battery or other things that the utility has to potentially do studies for, or other screens to make sure that it's suitable. So there's additional complexity and cost and time just associated with having a V2G charger beyond what you might experience from more standard unidirectional chargers. The next thing is that through the field data that we collected, we were able to see that there's definitely potential value to come from these V2G services. We looked at energy arbitrage, and we'll show that you could potentially offset about half of your energy costs by providing that type of service with some intelligent management behind it. But that all of these grid services, if they exist at all, are pretty early stage. So the technology that's enabling it and the calculations and optimizations that are occurring, all of that was what we call the infant immature type stage. So this is becoming more mature as we go, but don't expect it to be that everything from every manufacturer is fully vetted and tried out. Some of it may still be more in the exploratory stage, depending on what experience they have so far. We looked at a whole range of what grid services could mean, because there isn't just one thing that you could do that's providing a grid service. It breaks down into maybe different energy versus capacity or other type of market services. So you'd be like a formal market participant through some sort of aggregation or aggregating platform, which is probably your charge management platform as well. And then other items that are maybe more on the auxiliary grid services, so reserve capacity to some extent, stability or frequency regulation, and even just providing reactive power. And what we did for the study was to understand a few different columns that build into an overall worthwhile judgment call, if you will. The first one was just technical feasibility. So were there capabilities of the hardware and the software to be able to perform it? And in some cases, we put X's because maybe you weren't able to respond very quickly. So in the regulation market, the delay between actually receiving a signal and responding was a technical barrier that didn't seem like it was going to be overcome in the near-term future. So some would get ruled out right away. We also looked at cost or complexity to implement. And some of these, it's just a matter of having maybe a software platform in place. Others, it maybe has additional paperwork, and that if you're a market participant, there's all sorts of contracts that are associated with it. And it could, again, kind of snowball into a lot of different effort for what may or may not be a worthwhile payback, which is the third column of how much potential value is there. And some of these things, like providing reactive power, there just aren't a lot of programs out there that are going to incentivize you for it. So even if you could do it, it's not going to be a likely payback source, whereas others are maybe more promising from the capacity market or even energy if it's done in an intelligent way. So from that, we've kind of ruled out a number of them, not to say that you can't do some of these grid services, but just that we probably wouldn't recommend doing them first, and then targeting attention toward those that make the more sense, such as energy, and then reserve capacity, if it's through like a demand response program, should actually be probably in the green too, but this was saying you as a market participant as a bus. That's why it's in the caution. So from the energy arbitrage perspective, we looked at providing through an energy market setup, the electric school bus charge or discharge as needed, as kind of determined based on a simulation. So we would observe what the price profile looked like, run an optimization to say when should we be charging and not charging, and also accomplishing enough charge to be ready for the route times. And from that simulation, we're able to then estimate how much value you could receive by or through participation. So what we see is all the different sites listed out, and the energy cost that would be required just in general is in red, whereas the energy value that you could receive through this market participation was in green. And so it varied from site to site. It depended on the local marginal price and other items that were dynamic, but the general conclusion was that for this setup and this simulated environment, we were able to see about 50% of the energy costs recovered, if you will, through this additional service. So it's not nothing, but there would be a lot of complexity involved in this from the forecast provider and the marketing interface requirements. So also has some decent upfront costs associated with this assumption. And then there's just the reliability of actually doing that. And from our demonstration, we found that around 40 to 50% of the commands that were sent out wouldn't receive the proper response back. And so this was a big barrier that should lend caution to, doing this. It probably makes sense in a pilot setting, but not as a budgeting measure of, hey, we expect to get this value back by performing X service, because right now, the communications for this particular demonstration, at least, were showing that something along the way, whether it was the bus to the charger interface or the charger to the charge management platform or any number of other items, would cause a bus to potentially not dispatch the way that it was expected to. So as a value source, you'd want to make sure that this was a really reliable capability before relying on it as something that is needed for your payback calculations to break even. So it's kind of a wrap up of that portion. The intelligent management can definitely be a sustainability multiplier. There's a wide range of options that you can look at for grid services, but not all of them necessarily are equal value, and V2G doesn't necessarily even have to be part of that calculation, that you can achieve bill optimization and a lot of the potential sustainability benefits to the grid just by running some sort of charge management system that doesn't involve maybe dispatching. And the most important part, as we've kind of emphasized before, is that grid support or any of these other efforts should never come in the primary spot. It should always be secondary to getting kids to school, serving the primary purpose of the school bus. So that was something that was always the hard restriction in our optimization calculations. And then finally, I have a number of miscellaneous findings from the school bus demonstration, some of which we anticipated finding, others we kind of stumbled across. Oops, apologies that these are out of order. So the top one being, as mentioned, for this setup in this area of the country, the distribution equipment appeared well positioned to host electric school buses. That was not usually the concern, though there was still potential for some upgrades to occur, usually minor, just right outside of the school depot or wherever it was that they were hosting the buses. In the case of the electrical infrastructure, expect some sort of modifications to be necessary on site. And one of the surprising ones that came up was parking, that maybe all of the school buses had backed into these parking spots for as long as they have had this school bus depot in operation. And they realized that for this particular setup, the buses needed to pull in front ways because the charging cables were only long enough to reach if they did that way. So that actually required entirely rearranging the parking lot in order to achieve the capability to charge all the buses that they wanted to. So that permitting challenges, all the kind of incidentals are things to keep in mind as you go through this process. And you'll hopefully find some of those out through smaller scale demonstrations if you go partial, not fully. And then two that we'll have a couple of slides for is related to the ability of the grid to provide reliable service. So there was concern of, are electric buses going to be impacted by the fact that power can go out at certain times? And so we looked at the reliability of power over the course of the almost 3 years of data that we had, and understanding, one, when there was an outage, and then two, was it significant enough, long enough, and at the right time of day that it would actually cause any type of issue. And the data showed anywhere between 0 and 0.27% chance on any given day that there could be an impact. And that's not to say that you couldn't have achieved your route, just that it might have been at a somewhat lower SOC or something than you might have expected. And then the last point, which we were surprised to find, is that we had looked into V2G as a service, and there's always concern about additional degradation from providing that type of service, and understanding, is that a significant piece of the calculation for how long our batteries will last in these buses? And what we found is that while it does have some impact, the ability to intelligently manage SOC management, so not just charging up your bus to 100% and letting it sit there, especially over the course of a summer where it's just going to be in high heat for a long duration, that can be as much, if not significantly more impactful than whatever kind of cycling would occur from V2G. So that's something that, while V2G does have an impact, it's not so large that additional kind of controlled management of your SOC levels couldn't be the more prominent issue, and something that actually compensates even more than the V2G itself. So in support of the reliability bits, we have the couple of sites that are, or the couple of colors on the right for all the different sites that are shown, where red was that an outage would have likely caused some sort of mischarging, and then black was that there was very little chance of that actually occurring. Maybe it was just a brief one or something that occurred at night. And so we looked at all of these different sites and across all the length of time, and that's how we were able to come up with that number of the amount of school days where it's occurring and the length of time being sufficient that they're missing a regular charge period. There's less than about a 0.25% chance that any bus is going to experience an outage from this territory. And an additional consideration that came from this was that you could mitigate this effect even further by distributing your school buses. So at present, maybe there's a fueling station or something that is drawing all the buses into one location, but there's some advantage to potentially distributing where you have these school bus depots, that instead of being all co-located, if they're able to be distributed somewhat, you could have different electric supplies for each site, which could help both on the electric side as well as reliability. That if one was really out for some reason, you could drive a few minutes over to the other one, and hopefully that one would have power at the same time. If not, if both are out, then probably there's something more global that is occurring that would have canceled school anyway, and you might not need those buses. But just something to consider. There's of course having maintenance and so forth across multiple locations that could be a downside, but there's still consideration for not doing things exactly the way that you have in the past. And then the last plot that I'll share is the field data that shows our estimated state of health. So SOH is what's shown as the yellow dot. And this one's hard to come by in field demonstrations, but that was the value for kind of the regular day-to-day. So it should have fallen, if our simulation was correct, on the red line, right? So this would have been like your regular operation as it was simulated would have been on the red line, and we were within about a couple percent of the simulated value there. And then the blue line was with a simulated V2G service, but optimized charging. And so this is where our claim of you could have run the buses like you did regularly, you get the red line, or you could provide V2G service. And even though there would have been additional degradation from that, because we were having the buses typically charge up to 80% and only up to 100 if it was necessary or useful, then that alone was able to keep the realized degradation in the simulation to a lesser level. And so you're compensating more than the V2G itself was causing. So a number of other results that are of value, and I'm happy to answer questions or go through some of those in the future. I think we're going to have our session next week, but those were some of the key highlights from our demonstration project in partnership with Dominion Energy.
Awesome, thank you.
So
real quickly, what is the difference between like vehicle to grid and vehicle to the building charging and some of the other bidirectional charging that the schools may be interested in for resiliency? How many school districts are actually successfully deploying these technologies with the bidirectional charging? And how long before do you think this will actually be more widespread?
Start with the first bit, and then you can remind me of some of the other questions as we go along. We worked in partnership with Tennessee Valley Authority in particular because they had asked a similar question about vehicle to building capabilities. And vehicle to building is basically as complicated as V2G because you still need that capability, and some because now there's additional questions as to how are you running that as a backup generator, basically. So it turns it into a microgrid of sorts where you need some sort of grid forming capability. And if you have multiple school buses, some sort of coordinating capability across those to be able to function that way. So while definitely not impossible, and there are some demonstrations across the US that are looking into it, it's probably even more early stage than some of the grid connected usage of these systems. Number of school districts, I would say, is a tricky question for us to answer. We can maybe go back and see if there's some additional information, but broadly speaking, it's still in that exploratory stage. So while there are probably a lot looking at it, how many are regularly doing this as part of their operations, I would say is probably very few.
Yeah,
I don't remember if there was another question in there as well.
Yeah, well, once it's more widespread and easy, like we have more school districts utilizing electric school buses, especially in Louisiana, I know school districts will be very interested in, especially the vehicle to building, or other kinds of bidirectional charging where they can charge equipment and use the buses, because if there's a hurricane, the kids aren't in school. And if the buses are fully charged, that is a great asset that can be utilized to help with disaster response and recovery. We do have the survey up, so please, please, please take part in this survey. And thank you so much, Alex. We did put a link to his resource in the chat, and we will share all of that with you later because that is just so much information. I know it's hard to kind of absorb in the amount of time that we had. So please take a look at the chat and you can download that PDF. So while you all are doing filling out the survey, which I said we need that in order to get paid to show how well we are doing with this, I want to share some of these resources with you. And we're not going to follow every single link, but Tyler's going to very quickly tell you which each of these are so you can have an idea of what we have here.
Yeah, how's it going, everybody? So we're just going to quickly kind of give a little bit of an overview of the 4 resources that are listed on the right side of the screen. So starting off, you have the Electric School Bus Power Planner. And this is probably the most thorough of the resources in terms of just how much raw information there is there. There's basically a 9-step process for considering adding electric school buses to your fleet. And they cover things like deciding where you'll charge the buses, how many you're going to try out the first round, contacting your utility, considering charging schedules on how you're going to fit them into operations, and so on and so forth. And it's basically a set of questions that you should be able to answer kind of before moving forward with adopting electric school buses. So it's a pretty good resource for at least kind of like getting an understanding of what the process looks like and what you need to be considering before adopting electric school buses. The second resource there, Electric School Bus Charging 101, is a pretty short, like 4-page document. It kind of goes over a lot of the basics of how chargers work and how they would work for electric school buses. A lot of the stuff we talked about today, but kind of written out in nice, clear language. So a really good high-level description of school bus chargers, including stuff like costs, but also what impacts costs, why one might be more expensive than another, or one way of doing it might be more expensive or cheaper than another. So a pretty good document for kind of understanding very high level basics of how charging works for school fleets. And then that third resource is basically a set of 5 short videos between 2 and 3 minutes each that goes over electric school bus charging infrastructure in a little bit more detail than that kind of 101. And it goes over topics like the basics of electric utility connections, the various power connections to your site, electric service meters and how the electricity is metered for bus fleets and chargers, what the electric circuit breaker panels look like and how they kind of operate for an electric school bus fleet, and then optimizing your site for electric school buses. Because of course, electric school buses operate differently than a gas or diesel or propane bus. So there are some things that you can kind of do to better set up your site for that. And in that fourth resource, I think we talked about in the last couple of webinars, but it's basically a resource library by the World Resources Institute on electric school buses. It's a searchable, filterable set of resources. And basically, if you have any sort of, we want to learn about this particular topic in electric school buses, you can search through that resource library and probably find some good information there. So it's kind of a catch-all. If you don't have a resource that you need, you go there and search for it, filter through, and you probably find stuff.
Fantastic. Thank you. I wanted to let you all know that next week, also on Tuesday, but at noon, not at 9:30 in the morning, we're going to have an open office hour where you can drop in at any time. Just come into this Zoom meeting and some of the speakers will be there. The Louisiana Clean Fuel staff will be there, and we can help you navigate some of these resources, answer any additional questions, or request for additional support. So anything that you just want to talk about as far as it's regards to electric school buses or what sort of future training you feel like you could also use, please, please, please join us. And I sent an email to all of you. You may have gotten a calendar invite already, but we do ask that you register for it so we know who will be attending and we can prepare accordingly. And thank you all so much for joining us today. We're really excited to have you this past week, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you to all the panelists, and look forward to seeing you again. Thank you.